Oh, hi! You caught me engaging in furry culture. Speaking of anthropomorphic animals, let's talk about Blacksad.
Comic tropes. Comic tropes.
Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Well, we're in the final week of what I've dubbed Crime Month, and this video, like the others before it, were selected by my patrons. They voted on the comic Blacksad, so we're going to talk about that today, but it differs in two key ways from the other crime comics that we've discussed so far, and that's not even counting the fact that it's actually a French comic. First of all, it's set in the past. All the other comics we've looked at have been set in the modern era, but this is set in the past, specifically 1950s America, post-war era. Second, all the characters are actually anthropomorphic animals. So before we even get into this story, the tropes that it covers, and what it's about, let's briefly talk about the history of talking animal characters in comics, or as it's collectively known, funny animal comics. Funny animal refers to a subgenre, and it is alternately called anthropomorphic animals to alleviate confusion about the word funny, because while humor was where this all started, and is prevalent, it isn't a necessary component. Funny animals refers to animals that are bipedal, wear clothes, have jobs, and talk. They're essentially human, but with animal characteristics. Early examples in literature include characters like the White Rabbit in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. The oldest funny animal comic strip was the American comic The Little Bears from 1892 by cartoonist James Swinnerton. By 1913, there was Crazy Cat, a seminal comic strip. Animation soon brought Felix the Cat, Mickey Mouse, and Bugs Bunny. In the 1940s, as comic books blossomed as a popular art form, Fawcett published Funny Animals, starring Hoppy the Marvel Bunny, a funny animal version of Captain Marvel. And Blacksad is a modern iteration of that, using anthropomorphic animal characters to populate its stories. Now, whereas the other crime comics we've looked at have people that often act like animals in their bleak, depressing crime stories, in Blacksad, it's an inversion of that idea, with animals that are acting human. But at the core is the concept that each animal has certain characteristics, and those are appropriate for the characters that they inhabit. As stated earlier, Blacksad is a French comic, which first came out in November of 2000 by giant French comics publisher Dargaud. Dargaud was founded in 1936 and began publishing comics in 1943. Among their best-known titles are books like Asterix, Valerian, and Blueberry, and they have employed top talent, including cartoonists like Jean Giraud and René Goscinny over the years. Blacksad easily stands shoulder to shoulder with the greats. The book is put out by the creative team of writer Juan Diaz Canales and artist Juanjo Guarnido. As you may have guessed by their names, the duo is Spanish. The French have a larger comics industry than most other European countries, though, and Blacksad is published for the French market first and usually translated into Spanish a month later. In 2010, Dark Horse Comics got the rights to publish Blacksad in English and began by publishing the first 3 stories in one hardcover volume. Further editions were released here in the States in 2012 and 2014, with a planned omnibus to be released around June of 2020, and 2 new stories are also planned for release in Europe and America. The title has received international acclaim, winning an Angoulême Prize for Artwork in 2005 and 2 Eisner Awards in 2013. Writer Juan Diaz Canales was interested in comics and animation from an early age and attended college to become an animator. In 1996, he formed a small company that provided scripts for animated movies and TV shows. During this time, he met artist Juanjo Guarnido, and they connected and began working on what would eventually become Blacksad. Guarnido studied painting at the Faculty of Fine Arts of the University of Granada. Following his studies, he produced work for the Spanish translations of several Marvel comics, illustrating new covers and short stories in the early 90s. The Granada market was too small to provide much work, so he moved to Madrid and worked on a TV show for 3 years where he met Canales. He also worked for Disney during this time, becoming the lead animator of Sabor, the leopard who kills Tarzan's parents in their animated adaptation of Tarzan. I wanted to address Guarnido's background with Disney because I think it's about to become very apparent as you look at more and more images from Blacksad. You're going to see some of that classic Disney animated look to the incredible expressiveness of the characters. You're going to see it in the fluid movements of his characters. You're going to see it in the overall detail and the choice of color, the amazingly detailed backgrounds. It's all there. So, with that said, let's take a look at some of the noir tropes that the stories in Blacksad utilize. The first story is called Somewhere Within the Shadows, and it is a flawless noir story involving the murder of a famous actress. Our protagonist is John Blacksad, a private eye. He is a black cat, selected because the cat keeps their emotions hidden, is clever, mysterious, and deadly. The murder victim is a former love of Blacksad, giving the story personal stakes. He started as her bodyguard, and they were happy for a time, but she lived a wild life and he couldn't keep up. Now that life seems to have caught up to her. Blacksad's investigations into Natalia's murder has him cross paths with former bodyguards, filmmakers, and assassins. In the world of Blacksad, animals are selected for their characteristics. Police officers are dogs, wolves, maybe foxes. Criminals are often cold-blooded lizards and amphibians. Blacksad wears the suit, tie, and trench coat we'd see detectives wear in film noir from the 40s and 50s. The femme fatale is Natalia, who puts the story in the works. The police can't help as they have pressure from above to end their investigation. Blacksad works as a loner, and we hear his cynical inner monologue throughout the story. Flashbacks keep the story complex and keep us guessing as readers as to who could have been the killer. The settings are dark and ominous and aided well by Guarnido's impeccable detail. The story is not anything more than a noir story, but it hits all the notes perfectly. Blacksad does not get a happy ending, but the villains get what's coming to them. Blacksad is a story that utilizes the noir tropes perfectly. Now, a trope is neither good nor bad. It just is an element that makes the story what it is. And what's important is the execution. Blacksad nails the execution. The following two stories do elevate things beyond a standard detective story. Arctic Nation is the name of the second story and a white supremacist organization, a real problem in late 50s America. The story begins with a lynching, and members of the racist group include an Arctic fox and a police officer polar bear. Black animals represent the persecuted minority. The story also introduces Weekly, a leased weasel who writes for a tabloid, who becomes a type of sidekick to Blacksad and adds comic relief. The next story is called Red Soul and deals with Blacksad protecting a nuclear physicist from communist forces. Future stories would take Blacksad to a vibrant New Orleans during Mardi Gras and cross-country in a biker story. By varying up the locales and the types of villains, the stories all stay interesting. Rather than coming out on a monthly schedule, the stories are released as complete volumes when the creators finish them, so they come out irregularly. I'd argue it's worth the wait, because Guarnido's insanely detailed line art and lush watercolors give us environments full of much more detail than you'd come across in most comics. His characters may be animals, but their expressions are vibrant and easy to comprehend both from their faces and their body language. Action scenes flow, and none of the detail feels superfluous. You'll feel like you're living within the story. Having lived in both New York City and New Orleans, I'm beyond stunned at how accurate the level of detail is when you consider the artist lives in Spain. That said, these stories expose the dirty underbelly of America. Each story deals with America's problems, from the corruption that can come from unchecked capitalism, to the violent racial tensions of post-war America, to our fear of communism that had our senators turning on honest Americans at the height of the Red Scare. Beyond being a noir story and a character piece, the stories function on yet another level as an outsider's voice critiquing the concept of American exceptionalism. Let me be clear, The artwork is gorgeous and will be reminiscent of the best of classic Disney, but the story is very adult. Is it gory? No. But there is death, there is sex, and it doesn't hold back in either of those areas. So what you're reading, is this supposed to be like some sort of clever subversion by having, innocent talking animals and such an adult story? Well, no, I actually don't think that that's its intention. It just is what it is. This is how Guarnido draws, this is how Canales writes, and the execution is really something special. It is adult, but it's something special. Speaking of special, let's take a quick look at the fan art that came in this week to the channel. I stuttered that. Phil Simondi from Prague illustrated my personal long Halloween with characters enjoying various holidays. You can see more work on Instagram. Sheldon Martin envisions what my trip to Japan will look like. You just might be onto something there, Sheldon. Carlos Carrillo is a painter who decided to capture one of my lines from the recent Stumptown review. You can see more of Carlos's paintings on Instagram. This piece by artist Mickey R.D. shows Mickey answering me when I shout out my traditional, "Oh hi!" There's more by Mickey on Instagram. Finally, artist Borgesbor created an action-packed cover with me shouting my closing catchphrase, "Keep reading comics." Borgesbor has more on Instagram. Thank you all for sending in that amazing fan art. I love seeing stuff like that. If you would like to send something in, I'm happy to share it as long as it has something to do with this channel. Just send it to this address, comictropes@gmail.com. I'm happy to feature it. And on top of that, I will then pick a winner to win a Gachapon prize. So there were 5 entrants. I'm gonna just spin the ball spinner here. We'll just sort of do it like this. I'm not really looking at where it goes. I don't know if this ball spinner thing works or not, but visually it's more interesting than me reaching into a black bag. Let's see, it is now number 4. Number 4 is artist Mickey R.D. That was this artwork. I'll show that. So let's now grab a Gachapon prize. And the exciting news, folks, is in just a couple days, I am actually going to Japan. I'm going to get you some more interesting Gachapon prizes. So let me just grab the Gachapon machine over here, which was donated by Lunar Shine Store. I just didn't like having that table in front of me. So anyway, I'm going to reach in here. Got to lean it forward. And here's a Gachapon prize. That looks like it might be Hellboy himself. Can you focus? It won't focus on that. It focuses on my face. Thank you for bearing with me as I figure out this new camera setup. Having a little bit of trouble figuring out lighting, focus, stuff like that. I appreciate you guys bearing with me. All I can say is by 2020, I think I'll have the kinks worked out. I've got some exciting new ideas planned to launch the channel anew. I like to try to freshen it up every year. So got some good stuff in the works. Like I said, I'm about to go to Japan. I'll be recording an episode there, and I'm going to record some bonus content for everybody. I was going to take next week off, and then I realized I really, really want to do an episode where I talk about DC's Crisis series. And by that I mean before Crisis on Infinite Earths or the modern day stuff like Identity Crisis and Heroes in Crisis, DC had amazing crossovers starting in like 1965, maybe 1963. I gotta do my research. With things like Crisis on Multiple Earths. So I'm going to talk about the DC multiverse. I'm going to make a short episode talking about the fun and what kind of new ideas they created and when and by who. I just couldn't resist. There's this upcoming CW Crisis on Infinite Earths 5-part TV show thing, and I was like, I can't resist. I gotta talk about it. I love that stuff. I loved Crisis on Infinite Earths when I was a little teenager. Actually, that came out before I was a teenager. So yeah, I was pretty young when that came out. Anyway, that's what's coming up. Regarding Blacksad, one final series of thoughts. If you're gonna critique anything in this, and there's a few areas you could probably critique, although for me, it works. When it comes to the characterizations, they're all animals, right? Some are more animal than others. For instance, there is a polar bear husband and wife, and the husband looks very much like a polar bear, and the wife looks like a woman with a couple little furry features. And that's just true for most of the women in this story. The women look way more human than the men. The men can look like tiny weasels or big hulking bisons. They can have like amazing crocodile features and stuff. But the women pretty much always look like women with like, you know, a nose or some ears that are different. It looks like they've just put on a small bit of costuming. I don't know what that's about, you know. Maybe Guarnido just likes drawing beautiful women. They don't feel as animalistic as their male counterparts. Kind of an odd thing. Beyond that, I don't know that there's always a rhyme or reason for every character being who they are, but I think it warrants some careful attention, because the more I look at them, the more I do find a reason for at least most of the characters. You know, a German Shepherd as a police commissioner, yeah, that makes sense. Private Eye being a cat that's a loner, that makes sense. You know, there are like, you know, bodyguards that are rhinos or bears or gorillas. I get it. But sometimes, you know, when there's a character like the senator as a rooster, not 100% sure what it's going for there. I can maybe guess. He's trying to be sort of cocky and puff out its chest, but it's not actually that tough. And that's like this senator that was calling out people for being communists. So he's sort of not a great person. He's sort of a traitor. But I feel like I haven't quite latched onto it. Even now as I'm talking about it, I'm like, I'm close to getting it, but not quite. Maybe you guys have read this comic and you have some opinions about why certain animals were selected. If so, I'd be very curious to hear them. For instance, there's a story that deals with drug addiction, and some of those characters range from like a goat to a lion, and I'm like, why were they selected? I feel like I haven't quite cracked that. I've cracked a bunch, but not all. So those are some of my sort of thoughts, a little bit of criticism. I'd be curious to hear your feedback if you've read Blacksad. All I can tell you for sure, good mystery. I can never quite guess where it's going until I read it, and then I'm like, of course, makes sense. And the artwork is gorgeous. I can pore over these pages back and forth for ages and find new things to appreciate. The level of detail, these truly stunning watercolors, mwah, chef's kiss. All right, that's plenty of blabber from me. I'll see you soon. Until then, keep reading comics.